Welcome to 1 Year On. I'm Alison, and following on from episode 13, today's episode is about the bamboozling statistics of stroke. Up until March 2024, I didn't really know much about stroke. I thought it happened to elderly people. I didn't know why, and I thought the face had to droop and the limp was what happened. I think I had some inkling of knowledge that it was about the brain. I'd heard of aneurysm and that they were almost always fatal, and I knew of one person who'd had a stroke and died of it. And if that person had gotten the blood clot busters, this person would have been okay. I didn't really think about stroke at all, didn't really consider what it was all about. Wasn't I deluded? I've had to come to an understanding of what stroke is about and how it happens, and the variety of strokes that there are, and the general outcomes. And it's now a regular in my reading and in my discussions, and I'm living it every day. So I'm going to present some information to you. I'm not a doctor. I've got no medical training. I'm a communications specialist. I do read a lot, and I've only drawn information from legitimate medical websites and reputable sources. So here we go. In Australia, where I live, there's around 60,000 people have a stroke each year. That's just under 2.5% of the population. Males have a higher rate of stroke than females, 1.6% of males and 1.1% of females. The ages of people having a stroke are interesting. The average age of stroke is in the 70s, although if you're able to live long enough into your 90s, it's the most common for people in their 90s. Worldwide, the numbers are really confronting. 12.2 million strokes a year, that's one every 3 seconds. And 1 in 4 people will have a stroke in their lifetime. That's really sobering. I was told I was considered young, being under 55, to have a stroke. But young also means babies and young children can have a stroke. 63% of stroke happens to people younger than 70 years old. Risk factors are also interesting. I've got a whole heap of numbers, and they don't add up to 100%. Here we go. Elevated systolic BP, 56%. High body mass index, 24%. High fasting blood glucose, 20%. Smoking, 18%. Poor diet, 31%. High LDL cholesterol, 10%. Kidney dysfunction, 8%. Alcohol use, 6%. Low physical activity, 2%. Smoking, 18%, and air pollution, 20%. Also in there is hole in the heart, blood clotting disorders, heart and blood vessel problems, and autoimmune disorders. There are 2 kinds of stroke. The first is the hemorrhagic stroke, the bleed, the aneurysm, and they're around 10 to 15% of all strokes. A weakened blood vessel bursts and bleeds and causes damage by compressing brain tissue and disrupting its normal function. The bleeding can injure the brain itself, and the blood causes swelling and more damage. The bleeding also obstructs normal blood flow around the brain and leading to lack of oxygen and nutrients. Interestingly, there are 2 variants of a hemorrhagic stroke. One where the bleeding is intracerebral, which is within the brain. The other is I hope I pronounced this correctly, a subarachnoid hemorrhage, which is where the bleed is between the inner and outer layers of the tissue covering the brain. Aneurysm is a word most people have heard of. This is where a weak area in a blood vessel enlarges. Imagine a balloon. They burst and blood damages the internals of the brain. The other kind of stroke is the ischemic stroke. This is where there is a blood clot in a part of the brain, and that stops oxygen and blood from being able to get to the brain, causing it to die off. This is what I had. If you get to a hospital quickly enough, the medical team can give you clot-busting medication and undertake a clot removal procedure. I didn't have this. I don't really know why. I think probably because I got to the hospital too late. That's the variants of stroke. The next thing to consider is the region of the brain affected by the stroke, because different areas of the brain control different bits of the body and indeed perform different actions. There's a lot of information about this, and it would be impossible to go through everything in this short podcast. There are 3 main parts of the brain: the cerebrum, the cerebellum, and the brainstem. The cerebrum is divided into halves, hemispheres, like one of those Easter eggs, split in two. And on each side there are 4 lobes with different functions. The frontal lobe is behind your forehead. That controls voluntary movement, social understanding, thinking, learning, planning, organising, problem solving, short-term memory and movement. The occipital lobes are at the back of the brain, and they take images from your eyes and connect them to images stored in your memory. That allows you to recognise images. The parietal lobes are at the upper back of the brain, and they receive signals from other parts of the brain and allows you to understand the environment and the state of your body. The temporal lobes are on the side near your ears, and they are involved in memory storage, understanding language and emotion, also involved in the processing of information around the senses, taste, smell, sound. There are other parts that have specific function. The amygdala is part of the limbic system, and it's in the temporal lobes. It's involved in emotion regulation, as in charge or fear. The basal ganglia, where my stroke was, is deep within the cerebrum, and it controls movement and, I'm told, executive function. Many other things too. The hippocampus, I always find that word funny, is this small structure in your temporal lobe is responsible for your memory and learning. The thalamus, it sits above the brainstem. It's the switchboard to your central nervous system, relaying sensory information to your cerebral cortex from the rest of the body. The hypothalamus, just below the thalamus, regulates hormones and autonomic functions like hunger and thirst. The pituitary gland is below the hypothalamus, and it regulates hormone activity, producing follicle-stimulating hormone, growth hormone, luteinizing hormone, prolactin, and thyroid-stimulating hormone, antidiuretic hormone, and oxytocin. It's a very important gland, as you can see. The pineal gland, that's in the back of your corpus callosum, regulates sleep and wake cycles and produces melatonin. The cerebellum and brainstem are right at the back, and the cerebellum is the heavily wrinkled bit sitting below the rest of the brain. Fascinating, and combines sensory information from the ears, the eyes, and muscles to coordinate movement. The brainstem links between the brain and the spinal cord and controls heart rate, blood pressure, breathing. Now you can see how localized parts of the brain are, and with the functions they control, and how they're involved in the running of the body. Whichever part of the brain the stroke is in, some variety of functions run by that part of the body will be affected. Also, strangely, or maybe not, the left side of the brain controls the right side of the body, and the right side of the brain controls the left side of the body. For me, with the basal ganglia being the location of my stroke, it's said that motor functions would be affected. I didn't really find that. However, executive function was affected. I also had some language effects and word finding difficulties. I'm just a medical anomaly. Nothing is ever normal with me. Let's move on to statistics of survival and recovery. These are sobering in terms of outcome. Around 14% of people who have a stroke die of it. 15% die shortly after, in the first couple of months. 10% recover almost completely. 25% recover with only minor impairments, and 10% require long-term care. 40% require moderate to severe impairments that require specialist care. I'm fortunate to be one of, I think, the 35%, those that recover almost completely or recover with only mild impairments, and my recovery is still ongoing. I'm still improving, although my gains have slowed down. My neuropsychologist said that 24 months is the period within which most of the gains and recovery from stroke is, although the majority of the recovery is in the first 3 to 6 months. Really, I'm one of the lucky ones. I had a stroke that's only 1% of strokes, and 70% of those strokes in that region are fatal. I'm very lucky to still be here, and very lucky to be in as good shape as I am. I feel whichever god, goddess, or forebear was looking after me, I've been given another chance to do what I was brought here to do. Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, please like, share, and subscribe. I will be back next time to talk about neuroplasticity and how it allows you to heal from stroke, being the main way the brain drives recovery. The brain is powerful, working slowly but surely. That's for another episode. Thank you.